welcome to another episode of A Fat Perspective. I am super stoked to have Velvet Demore with me today. I mean, where do I even start? Velvet is a human of so many accomplishments. She's a
Thank
fashion,
you.
well, aren't you? I mean,
Well, I try, that's for sure.
you're a fashion photographer. She started Voluptude magazine. Like, I mean, I feel like you're like the original plus size supermodel anyway. And also beyond that, she's appeared in Jean Paul Gaultier's 2007 Spring and Summer collection, as well as Galliano's Everybody is Beautiful in 2006. And she was also featured in a film called Evita that was shown in both Cannes and Tribeca Film Festival. So, I mean, like, look at you. You're so amazing.
Thank you. And I've shot you, so that just brings me up even higher.
Well, yeah, that's the crowning accomplishment.
Crowning glory for sure.
So, Velvet, one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to connect with you is because the podcast is made for people to feel good about themselves and their body. And you to me is somebody who's very much like embodies that. And how did you get there?
Gosh, thank you. For me, it was a little bit of a journey. I was like a fat kid, so I was identified as fat very, very young, got bullied like most fat kids, and thereafter, I really had to like look for ways to accept myself. So for me, it was more of like a behavioral approach, we'd say. I read Fat as a Feminist Issue. I read Fat So by Marilyn One. I went to museums and I was like able to see through museums how beauty ethics change throughout time. And that really was meaningful to me because it felt like someone's left out. Most of people are left out, in every era essentially. And so for me, I just felt like, well, why waste my time here on earth? Why not honor the people who, my ancestors before me, who made me how I am, whatever, genetically, whatever, then try to honor the like more capitalist, like beauty culture, fashion culture. I mean, I love fashion, obviously, but at the same time, I don't believe in letting people, be totally outcast from it based on a very minimalist beauty ethic that is really highly unattainable. So that's the whole like what my work is behind. So I basically just made efforts to come to love myself.
So I was curious to when you talked about fashion, like you're very into fashion, and I think you have a different approach to fashion or a different viewpoint of fashion than most of us, I would say.
Yeah.
Like, because I feel like how you see fashion is beyond like the canon. I mean, it's still very artistic. Like all your stuff is like amazing, but I feel like a lot of us are trained to see fashion in this really small view. How did you
Well, I
develop
guess
this
for
point?
me, like in terms of inclusivity, I just think that, you know, I shot this model who has cerebral palsy, and
Mhm.
she obviously gets little to no work. She does get occasional work, but very rarely.
Yeah.
But it's like everybody who has cerebral palsy wears clothes, right? Every fat person wears clothes. Like who's not wearing clothes? Who's walking around naked? So we the people are wearing fashion every day, right? Clothing could be conceived of as fashion. And I think like playing with it makes it maybe more perceived of as fashion. Like investing yourself in the decorum of your body is more perceived of as like quote unquote fashion, right?
Mhm.
I feel like some people don't really have even the possibility of playing around with fashion, especially supersized people like myself, because there's just not the availability. And then, many of us have to only shop online for the most part and not so much, in stores. But I feel that in terms of my opinions on fashion, I think fashion begins with clothes and everyone wears clothes. So why not celebrate fashion through like the breadth of humanity? Why
Mhm.
not showcase it on every person versus just a very, very thin, white, tall, young woman 24/7, And I
Yeah.
have nothing against women who are that way, but at the same time, it's just really boring because I think of fashion as not like following as much as like leading. So
Mm.
that's why I'm very into avant-garde fashion. We have a
Yeah.
section in the magazine which is all for avant-garde fashion designers. because I feel like the true essence of fashion is like creation and leading
Mhm.
versus more of a follower mentality when it comes to fashion.
I feel like those distinctions are like talked about in like, oh yeah, because art is creating and leading, but we don't always equate that in the fashion industry because it's like a business. So
Definitely. Yeah.
I love that you're reminded of that. So if you were to create and lead in fashion, where would you want it to go?
In terms of like designing or in terms of like what I do with Love to or
That's yes. Any area that interests you, like with diversity or with voluptu.
I think the direction that I'd go in fashion is really more the sustainability route. Like I
Mm,
don't diss people who use Shine because it's like if you are super big and you don't have a lot of money, then Shine's out there. You know, the issues with sweatshops, et cetera, isn't brilliant for sure. But at the same time, I think that having a more sustainable view to fashion, whereby, you know, you take your old clothes and you create new clothes, that's really interesting to me. In fact, I just found out that there is, you know, Mod Podge, which is what you would use to do sort of like,
oh, you mean like
you know,
the glue?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's a fabric Mod Podge. So I think for me, in terms of if I were to start designing, which I'm playing around with just for myself, not for other people, but would be like taking old clothing and making it new through art, like
Mm,
taking Mod Podge or like taking photographs and sewing them into the fabric, like much more of an avant garde approach, which still addresses sustainability by
yeah.
using my old clothes, but create something entirely new that nobody else has.
Mhm.
And I think that's really having fun with fashion, you know? And I think
Yeah.
because there's not a lot of avant garde things available to people my size, that we can make them. You know what I mean? I think it would be super fun, in fact, to like, you know how there used to be quilting circles back in the day and like
Mod
women really
Podging.
had it. Yeah. Like I think like women just got together. And I think we are
Yeah.
so fortunate to have this global venue where it could be really fun to just make like an avant garde, you know, clothing, sustainable clothing circle where everybody comes on Zoom,
Yeah.
everyone brings a couple clothes and we could all talk and have tea and make
Mm.
our weird clothing together.
I love that you brought up sustainability because one of the people I talked to last season, she talked about how sustainability is such like it's like a buzzword, but a lot of people
Yes.
do it incorrectly. Yeah. So I love
Yeah.
what you're saying. Let's like have a Mod Podge avant-garde
Totally.
quilting circle on Zoom. And I love that. Like sustainable avant-garde fashion. Feel like it is not done often.
No, it's not. But I mean, I think people should all go look at the avant garde section in Voluptu because it is really people leading the way. And they're mostly young, but I don't like to say young designers because it's like I'm so sick of old people getting dissed. You can be a 90-year-old and decide to take a soda can and staple it to your forehead with beads coming off of it and call it a headdress. You don't have to be 20,
No.
right? So they're all new, they're not like young designers, but they're all people who have dedicated themselves to an avant-garde aesthetic. And I try even within that to maintain a sense of diversity. So ethnic
Mhm.
diversity, for example, I'll have, you know, the people, I'll say like specifically look in Africa, you know, look in China. There's a lot of Asian designers, primarily Asian designers, in my opinion, who are dealing with a more avant-garde aesthetic right now.
I wonder, what do you think it's going to take for avant-garde to include like a diverse model population? And I don't just mean size.
Since the majority of them do happen to be Asian that I've seen,
Mhm.
they have a lot of Asian models, but in terms of like fat inclusion, some of them do, but you know, it's like the ones who are younger, in my opinion, the tendency is to want to be perceived by the fashion industry as like current. And so I think that there's a subtle fear of having inclusion of fat bodies as not being seen as fashion. And I think that
Really?
that's kind of across the board, you know, because obviously we accept, you know, Ashley Graham and she's now an icon of fashion, but she's
Is she
commercially
is
viable,
I'm
tits and ass and gorgeous face and
I'm
no
sorry.
stomach.
I don't think she's fat. She's
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
but I mean, within the fashion industry, she would be considered fat. So that's why they feel they're like going out on an edge. But is it an edge? Is it really inclusivity? I mean, I'm happy for her, and she definitely wants to help other people by
oh, for
suggesting that
sure.
designers, should be creating for a bigger audience.
She also creates for a bigger audience. I know she's had like swim lines and things that are inclusive of
Yeah, she's
bodies.
definitely coupled
Yeah.
with other agencies to other existing, like most bloggers who are successful,
Yeah.
I mean, my vision of fashion is like genuine inclusivity. And I will literally shoot a size 0 girl and the next day shoot a 600-pound girl. So that's to me the breadth of humanity. And that's what's important in terms of actual and genuine inclusivity versus
Yes.
just speaking about it.
I was really moved actually when I looked at the your fashion editorial of the model with cerebral palsy, because it hit
Mhm.
me that I have never ever seen someone in a wheelchair as a model in that way. Because I usually see like, like Disney would have a poster of someone in a wheelchair, like, hey, our parks are inclusive. It's usually see
Right.
it from a commercial side, or I feel like certain types of diversity is tokenized.
For sure.
You full on.
Totally, for sure. And also, but mainly within mainstream media because, they're dependent on their advertisers. Philip, who has no advertising, so I'm not dependent on anything beyond poverty. At the same time, because of that, they'll do their token issue, whatever magazine it might be,
Mhm.
and they'll be like, we have plus sizes, and they'll have within the page, instead of dedicating a cover or a full editorial, they'll have maybe a talk piece with 5 or 6 images of different people. Like this one has Down syndrome, this one has alopecia, this one's a plus size 14. And then they'll want to be, lauded for their incredible open diversity policy. And I just find it laughable for the most part. Because, like I've said before, I will literally give a 10-page editorial. And that's how it should be. Because how many 8 gazillion people have cerebral palsy? And yet they are never, ever, ever seen anywhere. And there's so many people who have that. I mean, she's not the first wheelchair model I've shot. Or, I really do try very hard to have actual diversity. I mean, the emphasis is on curves just because that's what I'm known for.
Yes.
And it's also very difficult for me to find people to model sometimes.
Hmm.
Another recent shoot that I did is a girl from Buffalo, New York, who she's an organ transplant. And so she had her port. And so, I showed the port within the photo shoot. And there's tons of people who have medical issues who live with ports, but would you ever see it in a fashion editorial?
No.
They'd erase it out or they'd never show it. And at the same time, I'm not like some people who want to use someone different in fashion. It's for shock value. So
Yes.
they're going to have, all like their rolls hanging out, or they're going to just like, put blood around the board or something.
Hmm.
It's maintaining a fashion aesthetic at the same time as, trying to create genuine diversity.
Well, what's powerful is the normalizing
Yeah.
in this context. And it occurred to me that that's one of the biggest things we can do to move diversity and inclusion forward, is to create opportunities to see these different types of people as humans.
Well, that's what I thought was so cool because someone actually described my work, my
Mhm.
photography, as glamorizing normalcy. And I thought, oh my God, that is so good. That's so true. That's exactly what I do. I glamorize, because people will say I glamorize obesity, which literally, like the last editorial I published, I titled it Glamorizing Obesity 101. Because I'm just like so sick of people being, because it was a much bigger girl, Vivian Rose. It's still obviously like it's a 10-page shoot. It's the same way that I would shoot a size 0 girl, I shoot a fat girl essentially.
Mhm.
And yet I'll be deemed as glorifying obesity, but I'll never be deemed as glorifying anorexia, which is, let's face it, what the fashion industry has done eternally, right? And no one ever gets questioned like, oh, you're shooting somebody who's, a size whatever, and time and time and time again, I mean, you're intentionally making a beauty aesthetic that is nearly impossible to achieve, and really now impossible to achieve, just based on the fact that so I just find that it's, yeah, either what people will say, I glorify obesity, or, I love that I actually do glorify, normality in a
Mhm.
sense.
Right. And I wonder, why do you think people, in your opinion, and I don't want a humble opinion, I want your like your truth bomb. Why do you think
Sure.
people are so upset when you quote glorify obesity? I'm using air quotes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that you can't, like, to be fat and actually accept yourself is a threat to some people because they didn't have their cake and eat it too. But to be fat and have attitude
Hmm.
is like really pissing them off, you know? Because it's like, how dare you? How dare you not buy into what I've bought into? I've spent my whole life hating my body. I've spent my whole life like watching what I eat. And, I am little Miss Self Discipline or Mr. Self Discipline. And you
Hmm.
must clearly never work out or never eat anything because your body's bigger. So, and it's like all those correlations between body size and doing sports, like tons of people I know work out who are fat. And, do they have to take a picture every time they are working out to prove it? Do they have to take a picture of their salad every time they eat one? You know what I mean? So I just think that there's the sense that it fucks their world.
Hmm.
The fact that it's a total mind fuck for them that you could be happy living in a body that they would never be able to live in. And that's like the question that I would also get would be like, how are you so confident? Like, how on earth?
Oh my gosh.
You know, like, yeah, exactly. So I just,
I like what you just said. It's like like living comfortably in a body they could never imagine living in. And that applies to all areas of diversity.
definitely.
The other thing that really drives me bonkers is when people, like what you just said about confidence, when people
Yeah.
like sometimes people will be, hey, like use my picture in a social media thing, or like confidence is sexy. And I'm like, you know,
Ah!
that really makes me mad.
Right.
Because why can't I just be like, why is because I'm fat, right? Like, therefore
Totally.
I'm confident. And because I'm confident,
Totally.
that's
You're
why I just,
brave. You're
I'm so,
so brave.
I'm
You're a
so,
brave soldier to walk in the world in your body. To even exist as you is very brave.
I know, how dare you?
Totally.
I would never be you.
Well, that's kind of their thing though. That's what
Mhm.
they can't handle is just like people be feeling good in their skin. And that's why we get so many comments whenever we're in social media of people trying to disparage us.
How I don't think I asked you this question. Um, how did you start Volupto? Like it seems like it's such a love letter to diversity. How did you think about it? How did you come up with the name? Like tell us.
You know, the name, I think I initially wanted Velup to us and I sort of forgot because I wanted it to be like up to us.
Yeah.
But voluptu is obviously a play on, the French word voluptu, which is voluptuous. And
Mhm.
so that's where the name came from. And I didn't think anyone on God's green earth would ever have it. So there was that. But my aesthetic was always very editorial and not very cataloged. And a lot of what was pre existing was much more safe and staid
Mhm.
and not very out there. And I'm out there in every way, as we know. And my work's very sensual too. If you open like a French magazine, you're often going to see sort of translucent fabrics, or somebody might be topless. And so I just wanted very much to have a fashion magazine with a really strong editorial bent to it, dedicated to people who have been marginalized by fashion.
Mm.
So that's where that came from. It was kind of like what I would want to see if I were to buy a magazine myself. And I also felt it was really important to valorize people within the fat community in particular, or diverse communities, who aren't like a package deal the way modern media would want them to be, but
Yeah.
have actual talent. So that was another thing that I felt was really important, and honoring people who are actually making really positive changes within, our community and others. I just try to make stuff that would be helpful to people. And then, also interviewing different people to celebrate people who are doing stuff within the community, or people who don't necessarily have a commercial aesthetic, but who have actual quality and intelligence and they're not just a pretty face, quote unquote.
One thing it just crossed my mind as I read about this, and it's when we talked about like the of unavailability of plus size clothing, makes me think that a lot of times, like, I think disability or differences, maybe not disability, differences were like hyper visible because you walked on the street or look different than everybody else. But at the same time,
Yeah.
you're like super invisible because you're not considered. So it's
Yeah.
this struggle of like, how do I deal with everyone just like kind of like side-eyeing me? And at the same time, when I want something where I want to like be part of it, it's like, you don't exist.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Inclusion's a major issue, but I think that people are trying to change. I think that there's revolutionary people who are really, pushing for that change. And just like I think within the plus size, world, the
Mhm.
fat community, it's really bloggers who have, and our community itself, like that's what differentiates us in a sense, in a really positive way, is that designers would not create for us. So then you have somebody like Shauna, who had chubby cartwheels, who made an entire line herself and said, well, I'll create for us. We just refused to continue to be invisible, so we created our a whole own world in a sense, didn't we? Because it's like you put plus size or fat in Instagram now and there's 8 trillion different things, whereas when I started there was none. So
Right. I would argue you were one of the first.
thank you.
Like really and truly. Like, and I can't even imagine the
Mhm.
courage and audacity it took you to put yourself out there, because it's already hard, but it's less hard when you see someone in front of you.
For sure. And I think that for me, I wasn't affected by people's opinion of me. And I think that that's important, because I think, it's very difficult. A
Yeah.
lot of people can't handle the hate. And I got a lot of hate. But I was just always like, well, you're spending your time talking about me, so I win. Like, I literally could care less what someone's opinion is. And I think that that's like true confidence. And that's why only you can get there. Like, you can ask me how I got as confident as I am, how I'm happy in my skin, whatever. But it's a personal journey. So for me, it was that journey of looking around and seeing people who are my size, and like, then really that museum thing where it was like, I'm not going to waste my life because this current beauty ethic is, white, thin, tall, whatever, big ass now, big tits, maybe. But, that I'm not going to blow my whole life because I don't get to that. I don't attain it. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm going to really just look back and say, like, I am how I am based on whoever was before me.
Mhm.
And why not honor that? You know what I mean? Those particular things, like, I just questioned. Like, I would go to a restaurant and
Mhm.
I would always hear women when they're ordering say, like, what are you getting? What are you getting? Oh, I couldn't possibly have dessert. Never. And then the guys next to them would never in their life be questioning what they're getting or what they're eating or how much they're eating or if
Mhm.
something's bad or good. And I thought, that's just like ridiculous that men totally get away with not having to worry. I mean, now it's probably more that some men do feel that way, but at the time I just thought, like, wow, like, it's so divergent how, like, women are maintained to uphold this aesthetic of physical beauty and men are not, and physical beauty always being attributed to how much space you take. So for me, that was another thing that was like, fuck this, I'm going to be who I am, and that's like, and I'm going to love being who I am. And so in having that acceptance that I made myself, that I created
Mhm.
for myself, like, it's basically nobody can fuck with me. Like, you can say whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. You can say I'm terrible, I'm horrible, oh my god, I'm like the ugliest person on earth, whatever. but it's literally not going to affect me. And I think that it's harder now because social media, for people who are younger, I think it's much harder because there's always this comparison. And I didn't have that. I was in my own little world thinking I was great and believing it, and that was that. I think it's easy to question now because there's like 8 trillion other great people, and you're like, am I great as that person? Is that person as great as me? You know what I mean?
In a different respect, though, I think it's better because there's options, right? Like when
Yes,
I was growing up, like I didn't have social media, so I saw whatever the magazines wanted me to see. So
for
I'd open
sure.
YM-17, and then that was my golden standard. And
Yeah, same
that
here.
was right. And with social media, you can, if you choose, select on what you see. So it's for better or for worse, right? Like
Yeah,
you could
yeah,
become like, and this is how we have like the political divide gets worse and worse because you can curate your media
yes.
to
Your
support
own
your
opinions at
viewpoint.
all times, for sure.
But
That's so true.
with that comes access to diversity. And like I've definitely told my algorithm, I do not show me weight loss journeys. I don't need to see that. Like, don't
For
like
sure.
I want to see activists and I want to see people who care about other people's growth and development. So
Yeah, that's very true. I agree. I mean, it's interesting because I've just remembered the girl about the lipedema. Her name is Glitter and Lasers. And I think she's getting some flack because she has decided to go on this health journey. And she's working out all the time. And I think that for me, it's like it's such an individual choice. I think that the amount of effort and pain and agony one goes through when you're exercising a great deal and you're a much bigger body probably warrants the need to be perceived of as some sort of a success. But at the same time, I think people are hating on her because she was this one person who, in their mind, was like bigger and accepted herself. But it's like anytime somebody's bigger and accepts themselves and then decides to work out or has lost weight or whatever, it becomes this major issue that they've somehow secretly detested themselves throughout, the
well,
whole
yeah,
time.
it does, right? Anybody like Rebel Wilson and then Adele, like all,
Yeah, in the public eye, the majority of people who were fat, Oprah, whatever, have all, then gone on to lose weight. I think it's probably particularly difficult in the public eye, but at the same time, I get both sides of it. I get how disappointing it is to have somebody who you perceive as this icon of fat acceptance then turn around and show before and after pictures. You know what I mean? But I also think it's personal. You just never know why someone loses or gains weight. People could get cancer and have cancer and be losing weight, and then people diss them within the community because they are losing weight. And I know that that's what happened with Brianne Ward, who had started the first European, I'd say, plus size magazine, which is
Mhm.
called Evolve. She created that. She just was losing a lot of weight, and people were dissing her, and she ended up dying of cancer, and that's what it was about. So I
Okay.
think, the judgment that comes with weight goes both ways. And I don't think that it really does much to like diss people who choose to lose weight. If that's their thing, that's their thing. There's plenty of other people who are not going to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're that worried. But I also get that if you've been super activist and whatever, or seemingly so, and then you're posting a shit ton about weight loss, that it's disconcerting for sure, because that's what a lot of us, are avoiding, that kind of monopolization of what the media is already doing to us, essentially.
Right. And I think for myself personally, I really stand behind your body, your choice. How
Yeah, for sure.
and and our words have impact. So
Definitely.
so if you went on this like weight loss journey, great. How you talk about it though, afterwards,
Mhm.
that's the key. And I think for a lot of these people in the public eye, that's where they fail. Well, Velvet, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me
Thank
today.
you. I'm so glad it worked this time.
I am so
Yeah.
I can't wait to see more of your work
Thank you.
and I'm always like if I can any day I could shoot with you is a good day. So
Oh, same here. Hopefully, we'll be seeing some of your work with me. Keep your eyes peeled, people,
yes.
for
Yes.
highly amazing editorials that we have worked on together that I'm very, very excited about, and we'll see where they go, but
Mhm.
featuring your own beloved hostess. So go for that.
And shot by the most amazing guest ever.
And the best makeup artist, hair and makeup,
True.
Janet Doman, shout out. And your friend who helped with the styling, she was
Yeah,
lovely. So yes, I'm looking forward to where all that goes. So
same.
yay, and thank you so much for creating this wonderful podcast. I think it'll be inspiring to all. So
I
thank you.
and again, the hope is to move to change the world one little conversation at a time. So that's it.
Absolutely.
Thank,
Love it.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.